I had this epiphany. Louise and I were sitting in bed talking. It was 11 o'clock night before last. We were about to go to sleep, and it just suddenly hit me. And she said, that's a good thought. Write that down. So I sent an email to myself so I wouldn't forget. And here's what I wrote. And I remember all this because this all happened in my lifetime. I remember back in the early 70s when I started my first business. Actually, it was the late 60s. The first business that we started was the Electronics Trend, a TV repair shop in East Lansing, Michigan. Started that, I think, in 68 or 69 when I was 17 or 18 years old. And in fact, Louise was our bookkeeper. This was before we got married. And we were dating at the time, though. And in fact, my dad taught her how to do double entry bookkeeping. And if you wanted to hire somebody, if you want to place a help wanted ad in the paper, you'd call up that paper and say, I want to place a help wanted ad. And they say, do you want it under men wanted or women wanted? Because they were two separate parts of the newspaper, two separate parts of the help wanted ads. Women did not have anything close to equality in the United States in the early 70s, late 60s. Or, you know, any time before that. I mean, they'd only gotten the vote in 1920. So, or 1919, it was 1920, the 19th Amendment. So, what happened? What suddenly hit me was, and this was just kind of a recollection of events, 1961, if my memory serves me right, and it might have been 60, but I'm pretty sure it was 61, the birth control was a pill, was approved by the FDA for over-the-counter, or for prescription sale, but for sale. It was illegal prior to that. Over the next 4 or 5 years, there was the Loving versus Connecticut case, as I recall. I think that was 64, 65, 66. It was right around then in the mid-60s, which said that interracial marriage was no longer a crime. This was a Supreme Court case. And there was the Griswold versus Connecticut case, which I think was 64 or 65 also, which said that at that point in time in Connecticut, a married couple could go to jail if a police officer broke into their bedroom and found condoms. Owning birth control was illegal in Connecticut, even for married couples, as late as the mid-60s. And this went all the way to the Supreme Court, Griswold v. Connecticut. If my memory serves me right, Shane, you would know better than me. He's nodding his head. Okay. And it said it's legal for people to have birth control. Okay, keep in mind, this is just a few years after the birth control pill was introduced as a safe legal form of preventing pregnancy. And then in 1973, we had Roe v. Wade, which legalized abortion nationwide. So in this very, very narrow, and while the birth control pill was made widely available or was legalized in 61, it wasn't really until 65, 66 that it really gained acceptance, that women figured out that it wasn't going to cause cancer, it wasn't going to kill them, and it really did work. And so there was this period from the early mid-60s until the early mid-70s where women got absolute control over their bodies, which they had not had before. Their bodies had been subjected largely to the whims of men by laws that prevented them from having access to birth control, by the fact that men very often were dictating times of sex, that if the husband did not want to follow the rhythm method, there were functionally no laws back then that said that, you know, raping your wife was considered rape. It was simply considered part of marriage. So if a woman says, hey, you know, it's the wrong time of the month, I'm sorry, we're using the rhythm method because birth control is illegal here in Connecticut, and the guy says, I'm horny anyway, roll over. You know, I mean, that was life for women. And then by the mid-70s, women had absolute control over their reproduction, their bodies. And what happened? Women started showing up in the workforce. Women started showing up in Congress. Women started showing up in state legislatures. Women started showing up in, climbing the corporate ladders. Women started showing up in all these, quote, non-traditional. The newspaper stopped running women's help wanted women, help wanted men. In other words, women achieved relative. Now, obviously, we're not to equality even now, but women achieved power because they got control of their bodies. So what are the white conservative men doing now? They're trying to make it harder for women to get birth control. They're trying to make birth control more expensive. Oh, let's make it an over-the-counter drug. Well, that means your health insurance company won't pay for it anymore. Oh, let's say that your employer can refuse to cover the cost. They're literally trying to do away with birth control. There are some places where they're even talking about criminalizing birth control. They've already criminalized in some states some types of birth control, like the morning after pill. And they're criminalizing abortion and making it harder and harder and harder to even find a place to get an abortion. Take away the power of reproductive decision-making from women, and you strip them of their power. You strip them of their ability to fully interact as equals in society with men. This is the war on women. You know, Democrats use this phrase, the war on women, and I think a lot of people don't understand what they're talking about. This is the war on women. It's a war on women's rights. And the reason I said this also applies to Hillary Clinton is this war on women being waged by conservative men is deeply rooted in both fear of women and hatred of women and misogyny. And it's going to make it even more of a challenge for a woman to gain the White House. Now, I say that not by way of saying, therefore, Hillary shouldn't be our nominee. If Hillary's our nominee, I am going to work my butt off to get her elected. And I think it would be an amazing and wonderful and extraordinary thing to have a woman in the White House. It would be a first. It would be important. It's an important first step. But I'm telling you, the conservatives are doing everything they can, not just to stop Hillary, but to stop every woman in America.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Oh, and by the way, did you notice that Sandra Bland is a woman? There is a war on women going on in this country, especially women of color.